Game of Thrones is a long series of books turned TV series with a complex and labyrinthian storyline that stretches across multiple characters in the fantasy world of Westeros. Statistically, more successful than ever, the 6th season featured one of the highest rated television episodes of all time, The Battle of the Bastards. I'm going to investigate as to why it received the praise it has, and how we as an audience were compelled from start to finish. I will thoroughly analyse storytelling and structure conventions used in mainstream media, how much of an impact death and mortality have on the series compared to HBO and rival projects on television, as well as delving into the creative decisions made by creator George R.R. Martin, writers David Benioff and D.B. Wise, and director Miguel Sapochnik. This is how Game of Thrones: The Battle of the Bastards provokes thought and emotion through structure conventions, death, mortality, and consequence. While Game of Thrones obviously has a fantasy narrative, the characters within this world follow many similarities as our reality. One key aspect that mirrors our world is their perspective on religion. Just like our society, Game of Thrones is a host to multiple religions ranging from the Drowned God, the Old Gods of the Forest, the Faith of the Seven, and the Lord of Light. But there is never a swift change of plot in favour of these religions. The Old Gods are briefly seen but remain dormant throughout the series so far. The Lord of the Light makes an appearance now and again. The Drowned God is more or less just resembled when a new leader is chosen. The most we see of any of the religions is the Faith of the Seven during the opening episodes of Season 5. The Seven had their time in the spotlight and unexpectedly perished before our very eyes during the Season 6 finale. But no matter what their belief or way of life may be, all gods share the same finale: death.
There is only one God, and his name is Death. And there is only one thing we say to death: not today.
This quote essentially foreshadows what is to come. The characters cannot cheat death, but they can carry on and try to live another day, or to fight another battle. Death itself is anything but unpredictable. It is an inevitability. George R.R. Martin staples inevitable death as a crucial rule within this fantasy world. This establishes a better connection and relatability between the audience and the characters. Showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Wise remain true to this crucial rule in that all men must die, or more commonly said in the show's fictional language High Valyrian, VALAR MORGHULIS, by establishing that no matter of power, sex, or race, no character is safe. This is executed by killing off honourable leader of the North Ned Stark, powerful Dothraki king Khal Drogo, and cunning manipulator Viserys Targaryen, all within the first season. Completely destroying the audience's expectations, this brings all remaining and future characters to a mutual grounded level. If no character is protected more than any other, there are infinite possibilities for each and every character arc when their paths cross with one another.
I always like unexpected things, and I always like the suspense to be real. You know, we've all seen the movies where the hero is in trouble, he's surrounded by 20 people, but you know he's going to get away because he's the hero.
Yeah.
And you don't really feel any fear for him. I want my readers and I want my viewers to be afraid when my characters are in danger. I want them to be afraid to turn the next page because the next character may not survive it.
There is a large number of audience members who are tired and no longer want to see death used as a cheap plot device with no repercussions or consequence, as it so often is in Hollywood pictures. We are less likely to identify and relate to the protagonists if we feel that there is no danger towards his life because of the lack of mortality.
The golden boy, the character who can have everything and do everything and is, you know, the superhero, to my mind is less interesting. When people are debating vigorously about whether a character is a good person or a bad person, that shows you created a real character, because then they're debating about that person the same way we in real life debate about President Obama or Winston Churchill or Neville Chamberlain or, you know, real characters from history or from the current world. And, you know, if everybody thinks your character's a hero or everybody thinks your character's a villain, then you're writing cardboard.
Although after 6 seasons, we as an audience might have an idea who is slowly filling the superhero role, as Martin puts it, whether that be Jon, Jaime, Tyrion, Daenerys or Cersei, all have major flaws that prevent them from becoming the perfect character who has everything or can do everything. Jon is a bastard who is killed to save but also to avenge. Tyrion is a dwarf whose lust for money and whores led him to killing the love of his life. Cersei has lost all of her children and has killed or will kill anyone who stands in her way of the throne. Jaime is a self-centered prince who tried to kill a child, but has since become a cripple and changed into an honourable man. And Daenerys is a headstrong leader who loses the love of her life and can no longer bear children, and uses her dragons and weapons against anyone who also stands between her and the throne. Whether if these characters are your favourite or least favourite, one thing that is indistinguishable between not just these characters, but generally every character, they all change.
We're talking about the idea that you do lose something and that you're forever changed. Not in the supernatural way. I mean, he's still Jon, but he's been dead. That is a haunting experience, because if that really is what's beyond, and what's beyond is nothing, just the terror of knowing that.
What do you remember?
They stabbed me. I shouldn't be here. I did what I thought was right. And I got murdered for it. And now I'm back. Why?
Immortality, however presented, will not be a good thing. There are things we desire in order to live. Conditional desires are things we live for, called categorical desires. This is what makes life worth living. The things that define us as people, such as raising children, making friendships, and pursuing love. The issue with immortality is that these desires eventually become dulled as the decades rolled by. Jon has already experienced both life and death. He has helped to raise Arya, Bran, Sansa, and Rickon. He has made friendships, and even though forbidden by the Night's Watch, pursued love. After being brought back to life, he feels he has nothing left to live for. He leaves the Night's Watch as the commitment to the Watch is until death. He later returns to help his fellow comrades in the war to come against Ramsay Bolton. When defeat looks an almost certainty prior to the battle, he asks Melisandre to promise not to bring him back for a second time.
I'll have to try.
I'm ordering you not to bring me back.
I am not your servant, Jon Snow.
You're in my camp. I'm the commander.
In speaking to Time magazine, Kit Harington explains, Jon's never been afraid of death, and that's made him a strong and honourable person. He realises something about his life now. He has to live it. That's all there is. He's been over the line, and there's nothing there, and that changes him. He has seen oblivion, and that's got to change somebody in the most fundamental way there is. His experience of death has fundamentally changed his way of thinking towards life itself. Although executing every member of the Night's Watch that betrayed him, he continues to abandon his loyal comrades, thus becoming selfish. It is only until he is reunited with long-lost sister Sansa and hears of her terrible ordeal that he realises what is worth living and fighting for. The official definition of a scene is the place where an incident in real life or fiction occurs or occurred, a sequence of continuous action in a play, film, opera, or book. But Robert McKee states, a scene is a story in miniature. No matter locations or length, a scene is unified around desire, action, conflict, and change. This theory of desire, action, conflict, and change can also apply to characters, as well as a singular scene or sequence. For example, Daenerys' desire is to fly her dragons and destroy the Lannister fortress, the Red Keep in King's Landing. The action is when she questions Tyrion's loyalty and decision-making. The conflict comes when she asks Jon for advice, but when he agrees with Tyrion, this creates a conflict of interests. The change? Daenerys is convinced to be patient with her attacks and not turn into a father by murdering anyone and everyone who stands in her way of the throne. Emotional value is shown in this scene, and it is vital to the change area of the scene. Robert McKee states, the understanding of how we create the audience's emotional experience begins with the realization that there are only two emotions, pleasure and pain. As an audience, we are most compelled when we experience an emotion when the text takes us through a transition of values. A prime example of this is the Red Wedding during Season 3. Rob and Talisa name their unborn child, and we see a relief and stress-free Catelyn after strategizing battles for months. There is forgiveness between Walder Frey and Rob after Rob broke his promise to marry one of Frey's daughters, but the pain soon arises as a realization of Roose Bolton's armor. Why would he need such a thing at a wedding unless he was expecting conflict? Then the inevitable comes as Talisa is attacked and repeatedly stabbed in the stomach, followed by Rob and Catelyn being shot, stabbed and killed where they stand. Another example is the frozen lake from Season 7. The pain, the White Walkers realize the lake will support their weight, Tormund nearly being dragged under the lake, and the acceptance of death from Jon and his squad. The pleasure, Daenerys and Drogon saving Jon and his comrades, whilst Drogon is destroying the majority of the White Walkers. The so-called Suicide Squad escape, but only just. we revert back to pain as Rhaegal is killed by the White King and Jon is dragged under the ice, insinuating his death. The common theme in these examples is that the text goes from hopelessness to victorious and or success to failure, or vice versa. As well as giving the characters emotional values, the writers and directors all rely on our expectations as an audience to trigger our emotional connection with the text. Audience expectations differ depending on the genre of the text. The way we as a society react to films is very fixed. People rarely go to the movie theatres to be surprised, as recent box office figures show for critically acclaimed and now Oscar award-winning sci-fi pick Blade Runner 2049. A unique, smart, beautifully shot film that equally played on the nostalgia of the cult classic original and offered a new twist in the vast world of replicants and Blade Runners. But because it doesn't fit into the criteria of the Hollywood action movie formula of the action hero overcoming the antagonist and getting the girl happy ending, it doesn't do as well. This is the expectation we have adopted from the output of Hollywood pictures. If they don't follow this, they tend not to do so well compared to their Hollywood counterparts. Whether Game of Thrones first attracted their television audience from fans of the original books by George R.R. Martin, or just from stumbling across the series, the audience are fully aware of what to expect, even after the writers already defy their expectations within the first season. Regardless of the vast world with complex amount of families, locations and storylines, Game of Thrones initially followed all the basic fundamentals of storytelling, but broke a major audience expectation late in the first season in killing off the protagonist before the story arc was complete, from the original hero that was Ned Stark. Lord Eddard Ned Stark carried the bulk of the narrative's weight, featuring as a prominent character in the first book series. He interacts with the most influential characters, carries the most power when he becomes the Hand of the King, and shares popular characteristics featured in multiple popular fantasy protagonists. His loyalty and compassion for friends and family mirrors Harry Potter's, and his eagerness and willingness to succeed and rule as king is similar to King Arthur. Despite his coat of honour, he meets his surprising end thanks to the conspirators of Cersei Lannister and Littlefinger, who have managed to fundamentally play the Game of Thrones.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win, or you die. There is no middle ground.
This method of storytelling is completely out of the ordinary for the fantasy genre. Ned's moral code ultimately kills him as opposed to saves him. Eddard possesses the virtues of honesty and charity. He performs morally good actions, and both when he reveals to Cersei that he knows about Joffrey's lineage, and when he subsequently warns her about what might happen if the truth becomes public. Similar circumstances occur again with his son Robb, whose story arc we fell for again during Season 3, proving that Ned's death was not just a fluke, but a taste of reality in this bitter fantasy world. Robb was on his way to avenge his father's death by killing and overthrowing the Lannisters in King's Landing, which would have led to Robb being the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and cementing his place on the Iron Throne in the memory of his father. But Robb met his demise during the arranged marriage of his cousin in Castamere. Robb showed the effort to be an honourable warden and leader of the North worth following, similar to Ned. This led the audience into falling for a false sense of security that the narrative was back on the traditional track of the majority of fantasy series. As George R.R. Martin states, "I think a writer, even a fantasy writer, has an obligation to tell the truth, and the truth is, all men must die." So while audience expectations remain the same for film, fans of the series understand that their favourite characters are never safe. Regardless of who they are, whether their arcs are complete, all men must die. But there is one expectation. We have all subconsciously adopted the rule of 3. Sometimes called trebling, 3 is the smallest number needed in order to create a pattern used in stories and jokes, where a section of the story is told 3 times but with a minor variation or twist. The first 2 instances create tension, and the third and final instance releases the tension by incorporating said twist. The rule of 3 may be a trope used in media, but it can be seen as a psychological phenomenon adopted and used by society in all forms of culture. Veni vidi vici, lights camera action, ready aim fire, on the count of 3, third time's the charm. How many times in our lives have we heard these phrases? The rule of 3 occurs a lot more in comedy in present day cinema. One example is 2012's 21 Jump Street. During the second act, a highway chase scene occurs where Schmidt and Jenko are being chased by a biker gang. During the first instance, Jenko hits a golf ball with a tennis racket at a biker, causing him to crash into a gas tanker. The reaction, the tense music and the quick cuts all insinuate the tanker is about to explode. But no.
Watch out! We're gonna go! What happened? I don't know, it just didn't explode. That's weird.
The same instance is practically repeated the second time. just with Doug using a flag to partially distract the rider, causing him to accidentally shoot the tanker. Same music, same reaction from Doug and Schmidt, same quick cuts, but again, nothing.
It's gonna explode! Oh my god, roll the windows! What the fuck is that gonna do? I don't fucking care, just do it! Huh?
The third time, however, Doug shoots a biker off his bike, causing the bike to slide towards a rusty truck carrying crates of hens. There are no cuts, no shots of Doug's or Schmidt's reaction, no music. Just a cluck from a hen.
Oh! That's what exploded?
This comedic twist ties in perfectly with the genre and accurately follows the procedures of the Rule of Three. As well as using the film convention the Rule of Three, director Miguel Sapochnik also uses a method taught by Alfred Hitchcock involving the element of surprise. Hitchcock has been branded by many artists as the master of suspense. His innovative approach that partnered the releases of Psycho, Vertigo and North by Northwest completely altered the suspense and thriller genre. He famously said there is a distinct difference between suspense and surprise. Yet many directors and writers still manage to confuse the two. During the most iconic scene from Psycho, the audience get a better vantage point than the antagonist, thus placing her in a state of vulnerability. As we see the silhouette slowly approach the shower, accompanied by the score, we get the anxious feeling that not only something is about to happen, but we as the audience can do nothing to help. This is suspense. Whereas surprise doesn't quite have the same effect. In 2012 horror Sinister, we see protagonist Ellison Oswald discover and watch old homemade videos from what he assumes was the previous owner's films. We see the man filming using a lawnmower on the garden in the pitch black of the night. It eventually leads to running over and decapitating a woman, and the shock horror partnered with the jump scare music leads the audience to have a sudden rush of anxiety. This is surprise. Director Miguel Sapochnik applies both in The Battle of the Bastards, which we will look forward to later. With Game of Thrones debuting in 2011, 15 years after the first book, A Song of Ice and Fire was published back in 1996, 2.2 million viewers tuned in to watch their favourite families in Westeros be brought to the small screen. From then on, the growth in popularity has been overwhelmingly impressive, gaining a ginormous cult following worldwide, even to the extent of Khaleesi, which is fictional language Dothraki, for Queen being a frequent grower of female baby names in the United States in 2013. Fast forward ahead to Season 6 in 2016, a staggering 7.9 million viewers were tuning into the next chapter of this astounding universe. But this is an anomaly. Compared to other HBO projects and other popular TV shows in general, it's quite rare for viewings to get that rise in average ratings after 6 seasons in. Other HBO projects and similar length TV shows such as Boardwalk Empire, The Walking Dead and 24 all fall under the same umbrella, and they all share the same flaw: plot exhaustion. Plot exhaustion is simply repetitive storylines with no real consequences, leaving the viewer either dissatisfied, cheated or bored. Multiple projects that stretch over the course of many seasons to the extent of Game of Thrones suffer from plummeting ratings over time. One show that doesn't fall under this umbrella, however, is Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad reflects similar rating progression to Game of Thrones over the duration of multiple seasons. Season 1 claiming 1.2 million viewers in 2008, and later reaching a staggering 10.3 million viewers for the Season 5 Part 2 finale in 2013, with an average of 6.9 million throughout that season. The reason for the similar growth to Game of Thrones is because the audience see the protagonist, Walter White, experience consequences which cause him to change. That's the essential and most fundamental word throughout this research process: change. There is an escalation within the protagonist's storyline and character arc, which increases and ramps up tension from season to season, creating a more entertaining experience for the viewer. This is not the same man we witnessed get diagnosed with terminal cancer in Season 1. Now, if you focus the character progression, concentration and depth that has been put into Walter White and apply it to 30 plus characters, that is what Game of Thrones does. They all have vast character arcs and personal storylines the audience can invest in and get satisfaction from. We all have our own favourite characters, but there is not one specific main character within Game of Thrones. There is no Rick Grimes, and despite the amazing character development, there's not even a Walter White. All 30 plus main characters have their own progression, developments, conflictions and desires, but most importantly, they all change. As well as compiling a magnitude of film conventions to complement the narratives that led up to the battle, we need to recap the narrative told thus far. The feud between the Starks and the Boltons aroused shortly after the Red Wedding, which saw the King of the North, Robb Stark, his fiancée Talisa, and mother Catelyn Stark being brutally murdered during the arranged marriage of Edmure Tully and one of Walder Frey's daughters. Following Robb's death, the House of Bolton, with the help of House Lannister, took charge of Winterfell, thus beginning the reign of Roose Bolton, Warden of the North. The following seasons would show Roose Bolton later betraying House Lannister by arranging a marriage between his bastard son Ramsay and recently captured sister of Robb Stark, Sansa. Sansa is abiding with Roose Bolton's demands in order to protect her life. Ramsay soon becomes obsessed with power after Roose legitimizes him from being a bastard son to the heir of Winterfell. With the help of Theon, Sansa escapes Winterfell during Stannis' Baratheon's ill-fated attack on the kingdom and flees to Castle Black with Brienne of Tarth and Podrick, where she reunites with her half-brother Jon, who was on the verge of leaving the Night's Watch in the wake of his death and resurrection. Since Sansa has escaped and been sheltered by Jon, Roose Bolton has sired a son with new wife Walder. Ramsay's position as Roose's heir is uncertain. In order to solidify his position, Ramsay stabs his father in cold blood and traps and feeds his new stepmother Walder and half-brother to his deadly hounds, making him the new head of House Bolton, Lord of Winterfell, and Warden of the North. Sansa urges Jon to help her retake Winterfell and have the Stark banners fly in the north once again, reluctant at first because of the shortage of men he would have to take to the battle, until he receives a letter from Ramsay. Ramsay claims he now has Jon and Sansa's younger brother Rickon as hostage and demands the return of his wife Sansa, or else he will murder Rickon, seek out Jon, his army, and Sansa, and murder every last one of them, before having Sansa gang-raped by the Bolton army. Jon agrees with Sansa to march to Winterfell to save Rickon and to retake Winterfell. This final segment of the narrative perfectly proves an example stated by Robert McKee of desire, action, conflict, and change. The desire from Sansa is to go home and reclaim Winterfell from Ramsay. The action she takes is to convince Jon that his army is strong enough. The conflict is when Jon disagrees, and yet again the pair have a conflict of interests. Jon fears Sansa will leave to avoid being recaptured by Ramsay. After further debate, the intentions of the characters have changed, and the narrative has a new clear direction: to go forth with the battle, kill Ramsay, and retake Winterfell.
A monster has taken our home and our brother. We have to go back to Winterfell and save them both.
John Truby states, "It is only by competing for the same goal that the hero and the opponent are forced to come into direct conflict, and to do so again and again throughout the story. A protagonist and his story can only be as intellectually fascinating and emotionally compelling as the forces of the antagonism make them. True character is revealed in the choices a human being makes under pressure. The greater the pressure, the deeper the revelation. The truer the choice of the character's essential nature." Both bastards Jon and Ramsay, although completely opposite in characteristics, share a common goal: to rule Winterfell and become Warden of the North. Now that we as an audience have a clear understanding of the desires and intentions of both parties in the battle, we are fully invested in the battle to come. This is where the creators of the battle implement the film language and conventions that we have researched so far, and what will keep us compelled, thrilled, and entertained throughout.
It's two guys in a pub get into a fight and bring their mates.
The rule of three is almost used immediately, and director Miguel Sapochnik also involves the Hitchcock suspense versus surprise technique, yet turns the rule of three against us because he knows as a filmmaker we will be expecting it. Ramsay offers captured Rickon the chance of survival just before the battle commences. As Rickon is questionably walking away, and rightfully so, Ramsay calls for his bow and arrow. He is going to shoot Rickon. Rickon spots the danger and starts to sprint for his life. The tense music rises as Jon notices from the other side of the battlefield, and here we have our first piece of action. The quick cuts from Ramsay aiming, Rickon's panicking face, Jon screaming at his horse to go faster, the release of the arrow, Rickon's back plus the tense music building, all accumulate towards Rickon being shot. Except the first arrow misses. Not really to the surprise of the audience. We have our first sigh of relief, but the shot of the battlefield between Jon and Rickon shows that there is still a long way to go. This is all repeated a second time, but with the same result. The audience are now fearing the rule of three. The distance is closing, tensions are rising, the shots are shorter, and the music is swelling to a climax. We know patterns come in threes. We are all expecting the third shot to go straight through Rickon's back, but it misses. The distance has almost completely closed. There are no shots of Ramsay, just the two brothers. Rickon is safe. Sapochnik has cheated us in playing with our expectations as an audience, and it is the ultimate element of surprise. Jon goes through the exact same emotions as the viewer throughout this moment: suspense, relief, and then surprise. Sapochnik has created the strong connection between the character and the audience before the battle has even begun. Perhaps this is why the majority of the focus continues to follow just Jon throughout the remainder of the battle. Sapochnik isn't trying to show us that war is bad. He's showing us what war feels like.
I wanted to kind of get into the mindset of what it would be like to be in a battle like that.
By following Jon Snow throughout the first stage of the actual battle, we get the sense of what it would feel like for a singular soldier in that situation. The claustrophobia, unpredictable occurrences around him, and the sheer anxiety of Jon. The idea that we were with Jon for 58 seconds in a continuous shot with literal war surrounding him makes the audience more compelled, as Jon's emotional values are revolving around simply staying alive. His desire is to stay alive and ultimately defeat Ramsay to reclaim Winterfell. But this emotional arc that the audience are dependent on Jon to take is put at risk if Jon meets the wrong end of a Bolton army horse or sword. This emphasises how vital it is for a story to give a character a strong emotional flow. If it didn't, then the audience would not have the same level of attachment. Due to the longevity of the scene being 23 minutes long, we as an audience need to have multiple transitions of values in order to keep us entertained. The pleasure and pain emotions are prominent throughout the battle. Jon's failed rescue attempt of Rickon, his army following him before they're all ready, causing the army to divide to signify the pain element of the audience emotions, before a brief pleasure rise when the horses clash, essentially saving Jon's life. Jump forward 4.5 minutes later. What is left of Jon's army is now surrounded by Ramsay's secondary reinforcements and a mountain of corpses. Yet again, another twist in the pain versus pleasure convention. Jon is facing certain defeat and death, while Ramsay looks on from further afield. It seems all hope is lost for Jon and his army. He somehow manages to scrowl to the mud and places himself above the shoulders of his men, gasping for air. With the Bolton army continuing to enclose on his, our expectations have not changed. Then the utter relief for many comes as the score dies down and we hear a foghorn being blown in the distance. A sharp focus is played on the heroes' expressions looking over the fields. A third army is charging in. The banner shown is that of House Arryn, Jon and Sansa's aunt's kingdom commanded by Littlefinger and Sansa herself. The Arryn army charges through the blockade of Bolton's army, giving Jon's army a chance to escape the trap and fight back. Lastly, let's take a look at the final sequence of the battle, Ramsay's retreat. Ramsay succeeds in his retreat, but is hotly pursued by Jon, Wunwun, Tormund, Davos, and the rest of the army, who storm through the gates. The Bolton army is cornered and severely outnumbered. Jon and Tormund regroup with the fatally injured Wunwun and assess his multiple injuries, as he looks into Jon's eyes, whom he once hated for being a southerner, but now is fighting alongside him. Yet again, it is what we were expecting. This is interrupted and tarnished by an arrow straight into Wunwun's eye, killing him instantly. The arrow was shot by none other than Ramsay. Ramsay is alone, completely surrounded by Jon's men. He knows Jon could order his execution instantly, so he tries one last manipulative move. He accepts Jon's offer of one-on-one combat that Jon offered the previous day.
There's no need for a battle. Thousands of men don't need to die. Only one of us. Let's end this the old way. You against me.
He doesn't give Jon much of a chance to accept, but rather forces his decision. Jon guards the incoming arrows well and manages to take Ramsay down. Fueled with rage for everything Ramsay has done to his family, he beats and beats and beats him. Sapochnik frames the beating and cuts the shots to connect the audience to Jon's actions. The majority of the shots are of Jon actually punching Ramsay, while the only shots of Ramsay are quick cuts of his bloodied face. No angles showing Ramsay struggling for help, just pure rage. This is connecting with the audience. But this quickly changes after Sapochnik discreetly places Sansa in the frame. Both the audience and Jon realise this is not his life to take. Ramsay is later detained and held in a dark corridor, completely isolated from anyone. Still oozing and dripping blood, Sansa is watching him from behind a gate. This is Sapochnik's last implementation of convention. Ramsay's final moments is a prime example of the ironic death. Once the power-lusting heir to Winterfell, Ramsay Bolton, who used his own trusty and loyal hounds to kill his own brother and stepmother, is now nothing more than a vulnerable snack to his once loyal beasts. The Battle of the Bastards utilised multiple filming conventions that we as an audience are equally accustomed to and foreign to, as well as structure techniques that are decades old to provoke our emotions and establish a strong relationship between the audience and the characters. The relation of its mirrored success with Breaking Bad proves that it is possible to create compelling character narratives that stretch across multiple seasons and not decline in quality or ratings. The establishment of death in the very first season sets the future tone for the following seasons and uses our knowledge of film language and turns it against us so that we never forget that anything can happen in a Game of Thrones.